Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Gloria Blackwell, Chief Executive Officer at AAUW and co-principal investigator of the Let's Talk Money NSF Advanced Partnership Project. Welcome. We are very excited that you are here from institutions across the country for our webinar entitled Crack the Code: 5 Must-Ask Questions About Your University's Pay System, as we shine a light on our higher education compensation systems and empower you with information. Today's agenda will cover the Let's Talk Money project, goal of today's session, and questions you can ask to better understand your university's compensation system. So it's my pleasure to kick things off by introducing our esteemed presenters. First, we have Dr. Carol Marchetti, next slide, Professor of Statistics at the Rochester Institute of Technology and Principal Investigator of the Let's Talk Money NSF Advanced Partnership Project. Professor Marchetti has led a faculty salary equity initiative at RIT and conducts research in statistics education, cooperative learning, and gender equity in STEM. Welcome. Next, we have Dr. Jessica Bennett, the Assistant Vice President of STEM Education at the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, and she's also co-principal investigator of the Let's Talk Money NSF Advanced Partnership Project. Dr. Bennett leads a variety of NSF-funded projects focused on enhancing institutional capacity to foster environments that recruit, retain, develop, and compensate a thriving faculty. Welcome, Professor Marchetti and Dr. Bennett. Once again, thank you all for joining us. And now I'll turn it over to Professor Marchetti to get us started.
Thank you, Gloria. We get the next slide, please. So I'm going to pause for just a moment to let everybody read this slide. So that pause is something that we're going to do with each slide as it's introduced, right? This is to facilitate access to information for everyone in this session. It allows time for participants to read what's on the slide before focusing on the speaker. The second thing on the slide is about us asking you questions. So as this session proceeds, and again at the end, we're going to be asking you questions through the Zoom polling feature. You should know we may use these results for research purposes. Your answers will be confidential. They would only be reported in aggregate form. Participation is voluntary. There is a link in the Q&A, or excuse me, in the chat. Sorry about that. Link in the chat that provides full information about informed consent. And this is the same information that you were provided during the registration process. And I just want to remind you that if you don't consent to the use of your responses, then feel free to not participate in the polls. Next slide, please. All right, so Gloria mentioned the Let's Talk Money, or LTM project that we are all a part of. This is an ongoing partnership project funded through the National Science Foundation's Advance Program. So through this project, our partner institutions receive ideas and tools. They're also part of a support network as they go through the journey of attempting to improve their compensation systems. So leaders on this project come from Rochester Institute of Technology, from AAUW, and from APLU, the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, all bringing expertise in different areas. And our partner institutions are formed into two cohorts. The first one was 3 private universities that began in 2021. And the second cohort is 7 public universities that just launched last spring. Next slide, please. Some of the core ideas involved in the Let's Talk Money project are listed here. The first one is that fair compensation practices apply to everyone who contributes to the institution, not just top earners. And what do we mean by that? We mean that procedures, right, that are used to make decisions about pay are known and fair. That information about compensation practices and pay opportunities is available to everyone. That conversations about compensation are productive and without retribution. And that the salary outcomes themselves are equitable and that they reflect the organization's values and compensation philosophy. The second main idea is that transparency and communication around compensation are important, and that it's up to our leaders to ensure that pay processes and opportunities are spelled out. The last item listed here is that knowledge is key. That's why you're all here today, right? To start to know what questions can you ask to better understand the compensation system at your institution. Next slide, please. So the goal of today's session, right, is to motivate productive conversations around faculty pay in higher education. So we hope that this series of questions will prepare you to learn more and possibly illuminate potential areas for improvement in the compensation system at your institution. Next slide, please. We're at our first question. And with this, we're going to launch our first poll. All right. There might be a few more people answering the poll, but as to how transparent our pay setting processes at my institution, it seems like a fair number of people think maybe they're not too transparent. So let's dive into this a little bit deeper and know what particular questions could we be asking around transparency. Next slide, please. So we start with wanting to understand what influences compensation. So we might ask, what are the primary compensation drivers at my university? Right, what we might call levers, right, are available at certain points, right, in time to move pay. The first one, right, is your starting salary, right, or hiring rate. So this is the first one of sort of 3 buckets that we present here on this slide. So the second bucket is often referred to as the salary program, and that might include adjustments for merit, for market competitiveness, for cost of living, and other such things. The third bucket is job changes. Now, that might be something that's temporary, or it could be a permanent increase due to something like promotion. So a good question to ask is, where can I find information about primary compensation drivers at my institution? Next slide, please. So we want to know, what are the primary drivers of compensation? And we also want to know who is making those pay decisions. So on this slide, we start to address who are pay decision makers, and we have put them into a series of buckets. There may be more, right? But many of them fall into one of these. The first one is offer makers and negotiators, right? People that engage with the employee. The second one is budget authority approver, right? Somebody who ensures that the budget has funding for these pay decisions, right? And these first two buckets may fall under the role of academic administrators, like chairs, deans, or provosts. We come down one more bucket here, the pay system steward, somebody who is tasked with system integrity, right? Reviewing and approving pay decisions, right, with a lens to the entire organization. So this might be a compensation specialist, who could be somebody in HR, could be the HR director themselves. Next is the pay system designer, right? Who sets up the system, right? And puts those parameters in place to help make pay decisions. This is usually at a higher level. It might be university or faculty leaders. Could be a director of HR, a chief financial officer, a collective bargaining lead. It could be a union. And the last bucket here is the equity reviewer. And not every institution has these in some official capacity, but this would be somebody who would review equity, and it could be equity in relation to other staff, to other current hires, or to the market, right? So this might be a chief diversity officer. It could be somebody in the provost office. It could be somebody in human resources. So it's good to be asking who serves in these types of roles on my campus, and also to think more broadly, who might others be who have a stake in pay decisions? Next slide, please. Here we are at question 2 about policies and practices, and we're going to launch our next poll. All right, so again, it's looking like we have a lot of answers across the spectrum, right? Of people, whether or not they are aware of policies and practices at their institution around setting and evaluating pay. So let's try to dig into this one a little bit and think about how we could get more information. Next slide, please. So first, we address compensation philosophy. What is a compensation philosophy? right? We can think of it as a set of guiding principles for how employees are paid and rewarded. So does your institution have a compensation philosophy? If so, where is it located? Do you have access to it? And once you find one, if it exists, you might ask questions about the philosophy itself. Does it address fairness in pay? Does it articulate commitments to having fair processes for paid decisions? For helping employees improve their knowledge of these processes? And to having or promoting productive conversations around pay. So making sure that everybody is aware, right? And that these guidelines are clear to everyone at the institution. Next slide, please. So for the next few slides, we're going to go back to those different levers, right? For how salary that could influence pay decisions or where pay decisions are made. So let's start with starting salary, right? That first bucket. And we might think, what are the guidelines, right, for new hire salaries? So one example might be that we're going to make an offer that is fair according to the market, right? So new hires with little to no experience might start at a certain percentage of a market competitive salary for that discipline and rank. Could be that way. It could be however your institution compares itself to the market. And another guideline might be that starting salary should align with other salaries within the unit, right? We know that if we hire somebody new at a much higher salary, that causes what's known as compression issues, right, for other faculty in that unit. So there may be other guidelines that your institution uses, right, around determining starting salary, but that's the one place to get started. So let's go to the next slide and the next bucket. So our second bucket is the salary program, right? And this includes adjustments such as annual merit raises. So some of the things we'd like to know is, when salary adjustments are made, is there a pool for these salary adjustments, right? Often at my institution, we talk about having a 2 or a 3% pool, right, for salary adjustments in a given year. Well, who determines what that amount is? Is that your chief financial officer? Is that something that has to be approved by your board of trustees? And then you might also ask, what are considerations for salary adjustments? So performance is often a primary consideration, right? But there could also be, other considerations. So you might think, what about consistency of performance over a period of time? Perhaps we're also going to consider a person's salary relative to market salaries, right? So we might want to help catch people up a little bit. We might also be considering time in rank. So the longer you've been in a rank, it may be expected that you might be earning a little bit more. That's not true at every institution, so those are great questions to be asking. Next slide, please. So we've reached that last bucket of job changes, and we're going to use two different slides to talk about these. The first one is about rank promotions. So in a faculty member's career, there are really only a couple of places where you have that opportunity to get a nice jump in your salary, and that occurs generally with promotion and rank. So you should know if your institution's promotion raise model is based on a percentage of your base salary or perhaps a fixed dollar amount. And I give you an example here of sort of a fixed dollar model. And at some institutions, such as my own, right, you'll see that what might be tenure track promotions are treated differently than promotions in the non-tenure track or continuing track. At some institutions, they are considered the same. It's good to know whether they're, what they are and how that applies to you. Next slide, please. So the other part of job changes is the temporary increment, right? This is often referred to as supplemental pay. So what warrants additional pay for faculty, right? Is there a particular position or certain types of additional responsibilities? And if there are, we should know how much pay is involved. So some of these opportunities might include summer teaching, leading a large university initiative, or taking on the role of a program director. All right, so before taking these on, we like to know, is there going to be additional pay involved and how much? So these are great questions to ask. And also this information should be available to everyone, right? Not just someone who's asked to do a particular job, but the opportunity and the pay should be known and open to everyone. Next slide, please. So this last sort of category you'll notice did not appear on our earlier diagram, right? So retention offers. So these often happen when someone is about to leave the university, right? And they want to be enticed to stay. Well, they are not listed on our diagram of salary levers because they're often not a regular element of salary adjustments. Some of the things you need to know is about the policies and practices that your institution has around retention. So are retention offers even given at your university? What criteria are there to be given a retention offer? Because I'm sure a lot of us know people who have left. Some of them have gotten retention offers and others have not. So do you have to have an outside offer of employment? Or could it just be that you're able to say, I'm not getting what I need here, right? And you put that on the table. You might also want to know what could be included in a retention offer. I mean, clearly there's some kind of difference in base pay is often part of that. And it might be a percent, it might be a fixed dollar amount, but it could also be that there's some form of supplemental pay involved. And lastly, there could also be other support, right? That's sort of not showing up in your paycheck. It could be related to research space, travel funds, support for hiring students, right? And so on. So this is something that's often not well understood until you're actually in it. So it'd be nice to know a little bit about this before you got yourself to that position. And with that, I am ready to turn this over to my esteemed colleague, Jessica Bennett.
Thanks, Carol. And Katrina, we can go to the next slide. So here we are at question 3. We have our next poll, which is about how aware you are of your institution's market-based and internal salary analysis. You may still be finishing providing your polling answers. But I think, as usual, there's a little bit of a mix here, and generally of not being very aware. So there we go. Yeah, most people here are not aware of how their institution is doing these things. So let's move on to the next slide so we can think a little bit more together about how to evaluate that. So for most individuals, salary is going to be set by a set of both internal and external factors that combine to create the unique salary position you're in within your institution. So the external factors, right, are really based on a sense of external market competitiveness. But the definition of what is the external market, who is that comparison data based on, what is our reference data set, involves some investigation that we'll talk about in a minute. Your internal factors, sorry, I'm going to go back, but those external factors are often the rationale that's offered. For example, when we look at our computer science faculty making significantly more than our art history faculty, or our business faculty making much more than a classicist, right? This sense of the market being able to pay more for certain individuals with certain role and experiential criteria is part of what feeds into the external factors. In terms of the internal factors, this diagram really explains it in terms of role impact. But this could be things, as Carol was talking about earlier, related to what is your rank? What is your time in your role? What has been your performance background and history, right? So these are factors that are internal to the organization and internal to your role in the organization, and they will combine with those external factors to create your compensation rate for your role. The most important part, though, is that these internal and external factors should not be arbitrary. They should be guided by your ideally compensation philosophy, or at least guiding principles and values of the organization. And each organization may have its own combination of which of these things they value, what matters. So one institution may highly prioritize time and rank. That might be very important. Or they might highly prioritize that everyone at the same rank is getting paid the same amount, regardless of discipline, right? Two totally different approaches. And so there is no one way that we recommend an institution do this, but we do think institutions should be able to articulate what their rationale is, how it works, and what are the pieces that feed into that. So in the next remaining slides in this section, we'll dig into more how you can ask questions to understand and have your institution articulate these things for you. So next slide, thanks. So one thing we know is that institutions of higher education love to benchmark themselves, right? We never want to be too far ahead of anybody else, but we also don't want to be too far behind either. So when we talk about benchmarking, we may actually have multiple dimensions that we benchmark on simultaneously, and that may require different reference sets. So for example, when you're recruiting students, you may have a set of institutions your institution compares itself against in terms of the pool, where you're recruiting from, the kinds of students you enroll, and that might be based on things like your tuition, your location, your mission and focus, right? And so that list might look different than, say, your athletic conference, or it might look different than your aspirational peers, those people you're trying to chase. And it might also look different for your academic hiring market pool, right? Where are we drawing potential faculty from? Who are we competing against for faculty hires? Who's educating the people that we hire, right? So that behooves you asking the question of who do we consider our academic hiring market peers? And so this is that benchmark list. Let's move on to the next slide. But just knowing whether we benchmark and who we benchmark against maybe isn't enough to really understand the benchmarking process at our institution. We want to really be unpacking how do we identify those institutions? So where can I find the list? Is it the same as it was 2 years ago? Has it changed? Sometimes that happens. How do we pick this set of institutions? Who was involved in picking this set of institutions, right? Who did we check this data against? Who do we check these choices against? And then once we have the set of institutions, where are we actually getting the information about salary from, right? There are many sources of salary data. We've listed a few here. The most common one that many institutions use is the College and University Professional Association for Human Resources, where they pull all this data together from their members to be able to share with other members, right? To do some benchmarking of salary across many higher ed roles, not just faculty. But where is that data from? And is the data any good, right? Is there enough data? Carol, our statistics person here, right? This is a question. Is the data robust enough to even be able to make the kinds of inferences or to use it in the way we plan? And how are we planning to use it? Like, and how is it factoring in? Is there a model somewhere? And can someone explain it to me in layman's terms so I understand and can ask questions about how it operates? So these are all important dimensions. Benchmarking is more complicated than just picking the right institutions. It's ensuring that we have the data and know how to use it properly. Next slide, please. Regardless of the peer set of institutions that your campus may use to identify how it stacks up to others, it also needs to be focusing on what is happening inside the institution. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the factors that we've said that are matter to our internal salary system, like your time and rank, your tenure, your rank in the institution, your job role and what's entailed, that those are the things that are determining, and maybe your market external influences, that those are the things that are determining differences in pay and not characteristics of individuals like gender, race, or age, right? So this is the important element of the internal salary equity study and analysis, is to make sure that those factors aren't over-determining what's happening in pay. And I say over-determining because it can be complicated. If you're talking about performance playing a role in your salary, and the people who are doing your performance review might bring bias to that situation. So it could be that indirectly, your gender is playing a role in how your salary maps out. So we really want to be thoughtful in our salary equity analyses to make sure that we are examining deeply and with fairly close attention to these details so that we can identify any of these patterns and ideally step back and understand how all these pieces feed into a salary determination so we can understand, oh, is it the performance scores that are driving these differences? Maybe now this isn't even a salary equity issue, it's a performance review equity issue, and we can then elevate that in our system. So just really important. So first, do you conduct those salary equity studies? Does your institution do that? And do they share the information? Do they provide a summary? And do they share what they plan to do about any inequities that they found in doing the analysis? All right, next slide. So here we are at question 4, and we'll launch our poll. This poll is about access to information and professional development about your pay processes. All right, and Katrina, can you share the results? Great. So again, not so easy to find that information about our professional development or pay processes. Let's move on to the next slide. As you can see, there are some great questions here about the professional development program and education program at your institution that you could be asking. The key point here is, and I don't think it's unusual that so many of you do not know how you would find out this information, nor are you aware of there being a regular program of education around salary. I think this is highly uncommon, and it's an area, which is why we don't have a lot of additional information to share with you, because I think it's unusual. We think it's unusual for institutions to be proactive. So it is a good idea, though, to start to investigate. When is information shared about the compensation system? Is that something that is happening within Senate meetings, collective bargaining agreement, negotiations? Where is it, and what situations are there public or semi-public presentations about the compensation system? And how might I get access to that information? In addition, you may be wondering, there's got to be a wealth of information online. And sometimes that is behind an employee-only paywall, right? You may need to have to log in to your HR system to learn more about some of these dimensions. So if you haven't trolled around in that space, we recommend you do that, or ask somebody where you would find that information. In addition, we know that there's a severe lack of training for many academic managers for any type of management challenge, right? So our chairs and deans aren't educated on how to be managers generally, and specifically around compensation. And so, asking how is someone prepared to engage in these decisions? How are they supported by HR or the provost's office or whomever it is that's really owning your pay system is a really good idea, to make sure that they are supported to do things both effectively and equitably. And then what are the practices? What can be done to educate, and what is currently done for faculty to better understand the compensation system, particularly outside of orientation and onboarding, when you're being deluged with information about the organization and learning your new job and trying to track so much. Often that's when we get the most kind of information about formal systems like this. So what happens in addition to any information that might have been shared in that space? All right, next slide. So our last question. I am satisfied with the way pay is discussed and communicated at my institution. All right, Katrina, can you share the results? Yeah, not too many people satisfied with the way pay is discussed and communicated at their institution. All right, moving to the next slide. So your institution is responsible for communicating about pay in a variety of ways. So this is about making information easily accessible about their benchmarking processes, pay decision processes. So who's involved in any given pay decision? What are all the checks and balances, the steps in the process? What your total compensation is. We're not covering that much in this webinar, but we can answer questions about it if that's something you have questions about. And also, are they sharing information about opportunities to enhance your pay on a short or long-term basis, right? These are things that an institution ideally is sharing more information about. I think it's also important for you to explore whether the way pay is communicated undermines your confidence in the pay decision processes that are happening. Microaggressions are real. And when pay systems are not transparent, it increases the likelihood that we question the validity of those pay decisions, right? If you don't have a strong working relationship with the pay decision maker or the person communicating a pay decision to you, it can really erode your trust in the quality of that decision. And if our pay decisions aren't transparent or governed by consistent policies and checks and balances, we know that bias, conscious or unconscious, can creep its way into pay decisions. So we really want to be thinking about how clearly are we communicating the transparency that the institution provides. Now, at the heart of our push for transparency in pay systems is that pay inequities thrive in darkness, in the shame and discomfort we may feel about talking about money. And so even if you feel like I could ask all of these questions you've given me on campus and get good or not good answers or no answers, we think that you have a possibility as a participant in a pay system to bring more transparency by sharing with your colleagues, with your peers. You can do this sharing about your pay in a one-on-one conversation or small group. Creating like a data collection instrument, so do you have a Google sheet that everyone adds their salary to anonymously, or do we have a form that we ask people to add to and share? And that can be in your department, that could be in your institution, that could be field wide. So it might be with your scholars who are also working in your disciplinary area. And then using that information to ask questions, right? So we really believe there's a role that every single member of a university community to play in enhancing the transparency. Because if you don't talk to anybody else, it's so hard to situate what you've experienced in the broader field of, is this normal for the institution? Is this abnormal? Is it just me? Is this what everyone experiences? And so we want to also encourage you to find solidarity with other people to help ask these questions, right? Because if you can be with a group of people asking, do pay decision makers clearly articulate the process by which salary adjustments are determined? Are they providing us adequate information about our opportunities? Are they communicating in ways that make us feel less safe and less comfortable in talking about compensation going forward? And are we together in this going forward, right? So this is one of the key things we want you to walk away from, is both being confident and asking some of these tough questions of your campuses, and also to be confident in building solidarity and community as you raise these questions, because a group effort will be stronger than any individual effort. I think that is the end of our formal presentation.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you, Jess, very much for that presentation. We do have time to go over a few questions. Thank you to those of you who have submitted questions. I want to start out by looking at the first one, which really more is a statement. So at some institutions, the policies and practices around setting pay are explicitly, quote, secret, at least for those outside of senior leadership. If sharing information or transparency is inconsistent with institutional values, and compensation challenges may be just the tip of the proverbial iceberg, right? That's a so if your institution is not living its values, it's not just about compensation and pay equity. We may certainly find in other areas that there are challenges as well. So I think that's a really important point to raise at the top of the questions. So question for both of you, do you think that there are future repercussions if you decide not to take an offer for a supplementary salary, particularly if it does not fit your need?
Well, I can take a try at that one. I would hope that there would not be, but I would wonder about how that conversation goes down and what other questions you might ask about that, right? Going into that, it might seem like supplementary pay is something optional, right? That you get to opt into. So, but we also all know that sometimes we get voluntold, right, about things. So, and even if it comes with pay, it's not always in my best interest. I think those are good questions to ask, perhaps even before you're in that kind of a position, but even when you are, it's a good question to ask, right? What if I say no to this, right? And what would that mean for my chance at future opportunities? What would that mean for how I might be viewed in terms of tenure and promotion? There are lots of good questions. I don't have the answers to those, but I think that the more that you ask and the more that you talk about it, the better position that you would be in. Right? As Jess said before, right? Darkness allows inequities and other things to grow. So I always think that if you keep talking about this, then you're shining a light on it.
Great. Thanks, Carol. Let's see. Next question. What is a good first step if our university has previously stated that they have none of these procedures in place? Sort of where is a good place to start?
That's such a great question.
It is.
We generally, in our approach with working with the 10 universities we've worked with so far, is to start where there's the most will to get started, because that you want to be building momentum and not have the first thing you do in order to advance pay equity be a huge battle. So for many, that is a benchmarking study, quite honestly. That's where institutions feel often very comfortable because it's external data. And also we academics like to quibble over the particulars. So they know that it can, I don't know that people are doing it intentionally, but it consumes a lot of energy to identify the benchmarking set. It takes time. Often there are very fancy consulting firms that are coming in and doing that work on behalf of an institution. And so sometimes that's easier because, like any consulting report, an institution can choose to run with it or choose to leave it sitting on a table, right? So that's often an easy place to start. I think another place to start is looking at, do we have a compensation philosophy? Because that can sometimes be your first principles. That could be setting, what do we think matters, which could then inform how do you go about choosing your benchmarks, right? If your benchmarks, if what you really want to be is grounded in a compensation philosophy that serves your region, right? I mean, it really depends, right, on this philosophy, that the people of our region, and we want to compare, then maybe you're not picking a national data set, right, for your comparison, right? So some of that as well, right, is your institution's compensation philosophy attempting to be nationally competitive, or does it want to be regionally competitive or locally competitive, right? Do you want to have a unified staff and faculty compensation philosophy, or do you want to have distinctive ones? So sometimes those questions can feel easier to answer because they're also not leading you down a road for an institution to commit to addressing either market gaps or internal equity. I would say the most important place to start would be internal equity, but that may not be the easiest place to start. I would also encourage anyone that's trying to help move this kind of work around is to really look at your institution's strategic plan and to see where there might be a rationale for some of this work to happen in relation to the strategic plan of the university. Because in theory, that is supposed to be the document we're all living by going forward. And so how is that? How is what we're doing, and how can we make an argument for a well compensated workforce to be enhancing the outcomes of our strategic plan? So just a few things to think about.
You know, Jess, if I might just add to that, as a faculty member, I might not be well placed to say, hey, I think we should do a benchmark study, or I think we should, you know, work on a compensation philosophy. But one of the places that I have found can give a nudge is faculty governance. So a charge can be put into faculty governance to investigate, to make recommendations, right, regarding any possible things around faculty pay. As we all know, that may not be totally welcomed and loved by our administrators, but they sometimes do need a push. And I find that faculty governance can be a good way to get that started.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very good advice. I think that people can take back to their institutions. Next question is around pay compression. So do we have any suggestions for faculty dealing with pay compression? Our tenure track faculty in my unit, myself included, make much less than new hires, despite having much more rank, experience, and time with the institution. For example, a fresh out of the PhD assistant professor may make up to $10,000 more than an associate professor with tons of publications, grants, and 6 or more years at the university.
Well, those are great questions. And I did find out through kind of backwards ways that in my own institution, I could ask for a salary review. Go to human resources. It may not be anything immediate, but I do know of faculty at my own institution who have gone to human resources with, I want to say, with information to support their case. Right? You can't just say, well, I need to be making more money because Jimmy's making more than me. You really need to document your own case for that, right? And bring it forth. And I do know of cases that have been addressed. Sometimes it takes years to get to start to make up that difference, but it starts by asking the question in a very formal way, right? So sending a formal email to your human resources office, documenting this and asking for more information is at least one way to kind of nudge that and ask and say, hey, you bring attention to this matter.
Great. Thank you very much. I think we're going to move on to the next slide to be respective of our time. And thank you so much for your questions.
First, thank you for all of those questions. Carol and I will do our best to look through them, and the ones that make sense for us to provide as a supplementary answer, we will. For those that might make sense for us to come back and do another chat, we will do that. We will work with Gloria and the team at AAUW to perhaps do that. So we see there's a lot going on here, and you're echoing the experiences we've been hearing about from the institutions that have chosen to work with us to try to improve what's going on. So we do have a wrap-up poll. So unlike the other polls, which are more about your experience on campus, this one is really about what did you learn in this webinar? So please take a few minutes to answer the poll, and I'm going to ask Katrina to advance to the next slide, which has information about additional resources that you can access. So when you're done with the poll. I'm guessing some folks are still finishing with the poll, but if you're done and you've stuck it out this far, we thank you for joining us today. And we look forward to hearing more from you. And we hope you will check out our website, talkingsalary.org, connect with us. We will be hopefully sharing more information, more future dissemination of our learning from working with the campuses to be tools to help leaders at your institution and you at your institution to make change in the compensation system going forward.
I'm glad you could all join us today. This was a great opportunity for us to talk about some of the work that we're doing and hopefully give you some ideas about things that you can do on your campus. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And in the future, please keep an eye out for additional webinars that may be available as we continue to explore this very important topic of institutional compensation. Thanks again.